We've spoken a little bit about sort of broadly about depression, but post-traumatic stress syndrome or other conditions that you see patients going through and they get treated for that. Where would you say that the ketamine treatment responds best? Is there some differences? Maybe there's not differences. I'm just curious on your observations so far.
Some of the earliest work that was done with ketamine, so that report in Iran in 1973, that was actually with a wide variety of different mental health disorders where they saw positive effects. The Russians in St. Petersburg, they did early work with addiction, showing that it had rapid anti-addictive effect for people with alcohol addiction and opioid addiction. In the US, this kind of modern evidence-based medicine work that was done at Yale and the NIH that was focused primarily on depression. And that's why we sort of have the most number of studies done with depression. So we have the biggest evidence base for depression. The thing is that, so first of all, the DSM, which is a book that the American Psychiatric Association makes of sort of what a diagnosis is, major depressive disorder or generalized anxiety disorder, whatever. That's actually not based on any biological reality. It's based on symptoms that people have. Because when, up until relatively recently, we didn't have any good biological understanding of mental health disorders. And so the point is that, first of all, even depression, it's many, many different things that are overlapping. There's all kinds of different disorders that are called depression, but also that, no human being is a diagnosis. You don't just have depression. Some people with depression have symptoms of anxiety. People with anxiety have symptoms of depression. People with trauma have depression secondary to their trauma. People with OCD have depressive symptoms. So it's really complex and overlapping, and
Yeah.
it's also not stagnant. People change over time. We are a constant
Like this
evolving.
fluent state.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're our biology and is evolving and interacting with our environment over time. And what we found is that once we started treating people with depression, the person with depression that also has anxiety, their anxiety was getting better. Or the person with depression, they also had OCD, their OCD got better. Or they stopped drinking alcohol. We're finding more and more, both in clinical experience, but also in research that's been done over the last decades, is that there appears to be what we call a transdiagnostic effect, that there are powerful positive therapeutic effects for a variety of different individual disorders, anxiety disorders, PTSD, eating disorders, OCD, some evidence with personality disorders, addiction. And the reason why it makes sense from a mechanistic perspective. Most of the time, if you say, "Oh, I've got this new treatment that it helps everything," that that usually sounds like bullshit. It's probably not true. The thing is that the mechanisms involved, the primary mechanisms that we know of with ketamine, and there's many different, super complex, but we know that it increases neuroplasticity. So that's, this flexibility that your brain, the opportunities that your brain has. So if you think about, a stressed, depressed brain, or a stressed brain of any sort, whether it's stress because of addiction or trauma or an eating disorder, when the brain is under stress, there's atrophy of the connections and branches. So it's like a tree during the winter instead of a tree during the spring.
Yeah.
When you increase neuroplasticity, it's bringing you back to a tree during the spring. You have more possibility of thoughts and behaviors and feelings. So it's kind of increasing the overall health of the brain. which can help many different disorders. Whatever you're stuck in, it just helps you get unstuck. And there's also some mechanisms regarding reset of various dysfunctional electrical networks in the brain that are also transdiagnostic, improving cognitive function in your prefrontal cortex, rational thinking, executive control, dampening down the amygdala, our fear center, our worries, being on guard, dampening that down, dampening what we call the default mode network, which is a
Mode network, yeah.
rumination center, thinking about the future, thinking about the past, being stuck in negative thought loops. So, all these mechanisms can be quite helpful for a variety of indications. And finally, the subjective psychedelic effects of the experiences also can be transdiagnostic. If you have an experience where you have a deep insight or a novel perspective, thinking about something in a different way than you were stuck in before, that could be helpful to you in your life, whether independent of whether you're struggling with addiction or whether it's, you know, a trauma or whether it's depression. So these are all transdiagnostic mechanisms. In general, again, we have the most data for depression, but all the data that we're accumulating for anxiety disorders, PTSD, addiction, eating disorders, OCD are quite promising. And we're seeing very similar results with all those things. Slightly different, and there's a lot more research to be done, but we are using and doing research on ketamine for a variety of different indications.
A wonderful metaphor I recall from Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind. He sort of explained the psychedelic experience as you're in a winter landscape and there's a lot of tracks everywhere. And the tracks are sort of how your represents your thought patterns basically. And then the psychedelic experience is sort of fresh snow coming from the sky, filling all the ground with snow and filling in all the tracks. And then you're sort of free to make new tracks, new thought patterns, new ways of thinking. And I just really like that metaphor. It's, I guess, explains to a lot of people how it may feel.
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, that's the metaphor that we use to help patients understand the process as well. That came from both Robin Carhart Harris, Imperial College, and Mendel Kaelin, a neuroscientist there. That metaphor, yeah, that's how it can be used as sort of this catalyst for change, getting unstuck, getting out of patterns that we're stuck in, and ultimately that's what we're trying to do, independent of what the indication is, because whether you're stuck in a negative pattern of behavior with an addiction or stuck in a negative pattern of thinking with OCD, it's just you're stuck in a pattern. And from very, if we go down to the level of neurons, these are just billions of nerve cells that are talking to each other in a certain pattern, and the brain is plastic. If you're just using your right arm, that pattern gets reinforced and the other ones are not being used, but this fresh layer of snow is allowing other patterns to other possibilities to be there. But then we need to use them, we need to activate them and use them in our life, so to strengthen them.
And reinforcing them, yeah.
Yeah, the same way you can reinforce negative patterns over time in your life, you can reinforce positive patterns and habits, and that can become who you are.
If you appreciated that, then click here for more content like this. Go on, click it. And don't forget to subscribe. Be well.